Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 35 cheat sheet, looking ahead, of course, to the final 4 game weeks of the season. We have a few doubles left, and I think, of course, a lot of us will be looking into getting more Newcastle assets into our team if we don't already have 3 already. Maybe swapping around our Brighton assets and also thinking about what the best triple up is of Man City. Now, of course, with the KDB situation, that, of course, changed the midfield up a little bit. And I do think that it is worth talking about some of the budget picks as well. I mean, Eze is someone that I've actually added within the 5.0 to 5.9 territory. If Gross actually started the game versus United, I probably would have also added him here. But when we talk about Brighton, one of the issues, of course, is that all of their picks really could be good on any given week. And we saw that this week with Undav, Welbeck, and even Gross scoring some great points. But in reality, when you look back at the season so far, since De Zerbi has come in, it is players like Mitoma, March, and McAllister who have proven to be the best. McAllister for the reason that he's a penalty taker and at times will play at the 10 position. Buonanotte is also heading towards the Under-20 World Cup, which really just means that Mitoma and March will be called upon more. And even though we saw some rest from Mitoma and March, I still think that they're prime options going forward. So you have to look at this Brighton team as still a very lethal offense. And I think a lot of people were very low on Brighton, but ultimately on a different sort of replaying of that Wolves game, you could really have seen a great week for Mitoma and March. And I think going forwards, these are players that I have more confidence in starting going forwards than the forwards. And for that reason, they are still, for me, the best Brighton assets to go for outside of the defenders. As far as Martinelli, he has to drop. Unfortunately, we saw a Trossard start in the game versus Chelsea. Now, we could, of course, see Martinelli start the next few games, but they're actually very, very tough games anyways. And right now, we're probably going to a scenario where you probably only want to be fielding one Arsenal asset per week maximum, and Martinelli has to fall, especially now that we're seeing a little bit of rotation in the squad. It was a little bit sad, I would say, as well, to see that Jesus actually got the start over Martinelli, because I thought Martinelli probably was one of the more interesting attackers as of late, and we've also seen the Martinelli-Trossard partnership blossom quite well. But with the Martinelli dropping, you have no other choice but I think to drop him simply in FPL, and your view of him as an asset. Unfortunately, City players will have a lot of rotation too, but the difference is they've got doubles coming up, and the same thing with Brighton as well. As far as Joelinton, he remains there. I don't really like Joelinton, I have to say that. Even though we might be heading towards a double next week in Game Week 36, one of my issues with Joelinton is that I still prefer the forwards within this Newcastle team and even the defense at this point in time. Just because the defense will be nailed, Joelinton could play deeper positions than midfield. He has also played in wing positions as well. He has been involved as of late, but you can really see that I think Isak and Wilson are quite a step away from Joelinton from looking at the attackers. And of course, we've had some great games from Murphy, had some great games from Joelinton as of late, even Willock, but you can't really make the right decision with the midfield, and I think that's one of the issues. The ceiling of Joelinton doesn't seem as high as Isak and Wilson, which is why I don't like him that much. As far as the 7.0 to 7.9 assets, I've only added Zaha to the cheat sheet, and for the simple reason why Eze has been included, it's simply because this Crystal Palace team have 3 lovely fixtures to round the season off with. I think I would actually be moving both Zaha and Eze to yellow tier assets next week. And a lot of people will be making this sort of theory where because Crystal Palace have already secured quite a good position, they're not fighting for a European spot, that for some reason they're on the beach. And I think that's just untrue. You've seen them in recent games where they've already been clear from relegation, and you still see them capable of scoring goals. Eze is now the penalty taker, which I think was a very sensible decision by Roy Hodgson. Eze has also been playing consistently 85 to 90 minutes per game, which is a huge difference from what it was like with Vieira. So having a penalty taker at that cheap of a price with such great fixtures back to back, arguably 3 of the worst defenses in the league just set up in a row, you'd hope that someone like Eze and Zaha could be a great differential. Now, of course, they don't double, but if you have space for an asset like that in your team, I would highly consider it. As far as Rashford and Gakpo and Mahrez, these are all assets in this sort of 7.0 to 7.9 bracket that I wouldn't really touch for now. I still think that Gakpo is going to get more starts than some of the forwards in terms of Jota and Darwin. We are now seeing that Luis Diaz has also found his way into the team, so that's going to, of course, make it tough for Gakpo, but he has gotten his rest, so to speak, and I do expect him to be playing in the future games, so I would still consider Gakpo to be one of the more nailed Liverpool attackers in this team, outside of Salah, of course. As far as Odegaard, I mean, he had an exceptional performance, but I have to say, with the fixtures coming, that Odegaard still has to be viewed as an orange tier asset. Saka is a little bit different because I still value him as being one of the penalty takers from the team, so there's a huge benefit to that as well. As far as Foden, he is someone that I love in this spot here in this week, particularly where we might get some rest and rotation for the City team, because we're looking to City's fixture calendar and it includes European fixtures, right? So they will be playing in this Champions League match versus Real Madrid right after this Leeds game. So wouldn't this be a great opportunity for Foden to maybe get a start finally? He didn't get a start in any of the previous matches, and I think a lot of predictors were actually predicting maybe a Fulham start, maybe even a West Ham start. That hasn't happened, and so I think this could be a prime opportunity to give Foden a start versus Leeds. And we're looking at 4 game weeks left in the season. You probably want to be taking some punts. I do think Foden is quite a good calculated punt because he has an incredibly high ceiling as an asset. Looking at the underlying stats, even if he has low minutes, he is comparable sometimes to an asset like Grealish, who even playing 90 minutes struggles to really do as well as Foden when it comes to the goal scoring aspect of things. And you could see the underlying stats bearing that out as well. Foden and Mahrez do rate a lot better than Grealish in that aspect. But the difference, of course, is that Grealish has a lot of minutes, which is why you'll see that Grealish, of course, remains as a top tier option as well. I just think that with the amount of rotation that City expect to do, with De Bruyne out as well, and Gundogan not necessarily nailing down any attacking positions in this team, you do have Foden as an exceptional punt this week, and I would highly consider him as one. As far as the 9.0 plus assets, I've dropped De Bruyne and added Son to the cheat sheet. The reason for the De Bruyne drop is simply related to the injury. I do think he'll get protected maybe in the Leeds game. I'm not really sure that I would be confident about a start for De Bruyne, particularly if let's say the injury situation was worse enough to actually keep him out of the squad for 2 games back to back. So we might see maybe him coming off the bench for Leeds, or maybe playing 45 minutes versus Leeds, and that simply is not enough for me to consider De Bruyne as a great asset for now. I'd probably reconsider him later, but the issue as well is going to be something like rest. And right now you're looking at a picture where you could probably only afford 2 from this sort of bracket here. So Salah and Fernandes are still my priority options, because Fernandes will also have a double in the week that Kevin De Bruyne doubles. And even as a Real Madrid fan, I'd be a bit cautious about Real Madrid actually beating City in the Champions League. So that means more rest and rotation. And De Bruyne isn't really worth it if at that price for your team to hold an asset over. So I do think Salah and Fernandes are the preferred double up if you really want to have 2 premium midfielders. And that's kind of my view on things. Son is a differential for me. He doesn't have doubles, but the fixtures are really good, and he does look like he's getting into better positions now. And this could be, of course, the Ryan Mason effect, or just small sample size. And I think right now it should be a time to be cautious over Son and his viability as an asset, simply because the other assets in this price tier have doubles or are absolutely nailed and have the additional benefit like Salah of being on penalties, which of course made him a fantastic asset this week simply because he got those pens. As far as the forwards now, we have the picture a little bit narrowed down. I've actually removed a few forwards from the cheat sheet. I've also dropped a few forwards as well. You're slowly moving to a picture where I think Solanke is a great option, because we've seen that this Bournemouth team have actually genuinely improved under the new management post the winter transfer window, and Solanke has actually increased in his underlying stats, and we've seen that this Bournemouth team has been much more lethal as of late. So that's going to be a huge benefit as to why Solanke remains as a good option. Chelsea also look like a much worse defense than we previously would have considered them to be prior to the Lampard rehire, and of course you have some rough fixtures here, but Solanke is just a simple sort of glue guy in your team, so I don't really see any issue as to why Solanke would no longer be a green asset. What we're looking at for forwards, though, are going to be players who would fit a 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 going forwards. Isak and Wilson have to be in your consideration. I like Isak more for minutes, but of course, when you look at the goals scored by Wilson lately, you'd probably say that he's a better asset. I just think that Isak is slightly more nailed for minutes, and when you have these double game week fixtures, I do expect Wilson to actually be rested more so than Isak, and that's actually what has borne out in the previous games when you look at the minutes of Isak compared to Wilson. And I just think people are looking a little bit too short term in terms of Isak not scoring goals in the previous match. I think he had a fantastic match anyways, could have himself got 2 assists, which actually is very, very close to anyways getting 2 goals, because for a forward, a goal is just 4 points, an assist is 3 points, and Isak actually is a very, very chance creating forward, so that actually allows him to get bonus. So case in point being the previous match where Wilson scored a goal, Isak also got an assist, but he was actually at one point with more bonus than Wilson. So that's kind of the interesting thing about players like Isak, Jesus, and even Kane, where they play in some games a very creative role for their team, and therefore can actually rack up bonus points quite well, which compares to some other forwards who don't actually get involved with chance creation and are purely reliant on goals. Isak is a little bit flexible in that aspect. And he could be playing left wing, which would be worse positionally for FPL. And of course, if Wilson starts, that's going to probably take away the penalties from Isak. But I would still consider him as my best option. And Wilson, I wouldn't really mind a double up, but it really just depends on your team structure at this point in time. As far as Alvarez, he becomes a second tier option. The reason why I don't really like Alvarez as a pick this week is because I'm imagining that a lot of FPL managers still have Watkins in their team. And if you have Watkins in your team with a prime fixture such as Wolves away, right after we saw Wolves lose devastatingly to Brighton 6-0, I would say Watkins is a great asset to play this week. And I can't really see the need to go from Watkins to Alvarez. It's a bit punty as well. And I think it would also potentially worsen your team's ability to play around game weeks 36 and 37 if, let's say, Alvarez will no longer start those games because maybe KDB's back fit. You have Alvarez not necessarily locking down those positions when KDB's back in the squad. So that's going to be my issue as well. And that sort of competition for minutes makes Alvarez, for me, still a second tier option as opposed to a pure green option. As far as 7.0 to 7.9, I did mention, of course, that Watkins out this week is not a great transfer. But of course, the fixtures, when you look at after 35, aren't particularly good. You could say 36 is actually a really good fixture because at home we've seen some really great attacking numbers from Aston Villa. And of course, this Tottenham defense have actually really dropped off a cliff lately, even under Ryan Mason. And we're seeing a lot of poor performances from the team, particularly also with the lack of depth in the team as well. So that is one point of concern. That's why probably Watkins is quite interesting in terms of being a keep for 35 and 36. And maybe you could transfer him off on 37 if you'd like to, because Liverpool away is not exactly an ideal fixture. And even Brighton, we've seen, of course, can be a great defensive team, apart from apparently when they actually are extremely tired after an FA Cup semi-final versus Man United and have to play Nottingham Forest next. As far as Jesus, he's going to be an option this week that remains within the yellow territory. I don't really see any reason to value Jesus that much. The fixtures are very, very tough for this Arsenal team. He was going to be a differential for people who weren't going on a free hit 32 trajectory. And at this point in time, I'd still say that he's not exactly worth his price given the fixtures ahead. So I might reconsider him, of course, in game week 37, 38. Those are two fixtures where you'd probably want to start thinking about bringing back some of your Arsenal assets. But it also really depends on how your team's set up, right? Because you might still be trying to accumulate doublers in 37. And therefore, someone like an Arsenal asset would be omitted from your transfer plans. But if you, let's say, we're already set up for triple Man City on that week and you already have triple United, then I guess I can understand going for Arsenal transfers then. But for now, an Arsenal transfer is not really a priority. Tony continues to be an orange tier asset, and that's simply because the fixtures are quite poor for a team like Brentford. I can't really see the value of actually keeping Tony compared to some of the other forwards that I've mentioned, particularly the doublers from Newcastle. And with Jota, I think he falls as well, because now with Luis Diaz actually starting to lock down one of the positions in the team, and for me, Gakpo being the second most nailed forward, I do think Jota and his position in the team might be with a little bit of contention. Of course, Luis Diaz can continue to start games. He's looked quite good. Darwin, of course, a little bit exciting in the previous start, but I would not say that he's a nailed forward either. And they are very, very costly, right, in these attacking positions. I would say the priority here is still to go for keeping Kane and Haaland, or simply just keeping Solanke, Isak in your team and going a 3-5-2 setup. So that's kind of the picture for the forwards as of this week. If we move on now towards the defenders, I've actually increased Dalot and Lindelof towards the second tier. Dalot was someone that I said was going to be a differential for the previous week, but now that we're seeing that Lindelof and Shaw seem to be the preferred partnership, and of course Shaw made quite a few mistakes, unfortunately, in the last few minutes of the Brighton game, I would still say that Dalot and Lindelof are probably second tier compared to Shaw, but they're definitely options for the run ahead. Dalot, of course, we saw can be someone who gets a lot of bonus points because he will play in these fullback positions, he will chance create, and he will make enough passes often to get himself into great positions with bonus. We saw that early in the season, and I think this could simply just repeat itself now that Dalot is somewhat more nailed in this team. I, of course, think that there will be an inevitable opportunity for maybe Shaw to actually play left back as well, which would probably put Dalot's position in the team in contention, but it also depends, right? Because he could actually simply play over Wan-Bissaka in various games, but it really just depends on what Erik ten Hag's plan is for the back line. As far as Lindelof, it seems like he's actually nailed at this point in time, so I would highly consider him as a transfer option. And he's also so cheap where maybe he could be that sort of make weight in your team that actually allows you to go for a more aggressive transfer right on the other positions in FPL. So a midfielder or attacker that's a little bit more expensive could be affordable if you actually go for someone as cheap as Lindelof. As far as Pedro Porro and Ben White, these are two falls, and you'll also see that there's a fall for Gabriel as well. Zinchenko, of course, will be included in this sort of discussion. Gabriel, of course, a little bit of an injury issue. We could see him miss out the Newcastle game, which would be quite devastating. And it probably suggests that you'd probably be better off moving away from one of these Arsenal players, because The chances for clean sheets aren't fantastic, right? You still have Newcastle and Brighton back to back. Those are very tough games for Arsenal. And maybe you could only really, as I said, reconsider going for an Arsenal asset later on. We've also seen that Nottingham Forest have been very capable when it comes to actually scoring at home. So that's a concern considering that this Arsenal team has a lot of injuries, that Saliba is still not fit. And we've also seen a lot of mistakes really from Zinchenko and that sort of flank. A lot of over-the-top balls being played there. People definitely looking to target Zinchenko as well. We actually also saw a fantastic opportunity for Chilwell to do well, but I'll talk about Chilwell in a second. Pedro Porro falls for the same reason why I talked about why Tottenham is a little bit scary as a team. They do seem to actually have their attack in order, and we see that they actually were able to score both versus Liverpool and United recently. But of course, the defensive picture seems to have actually gotten worse. We've seen, of course, the test of a back four, but even under this back five setup, and with Ryan Mason back in the team, I just don't really see the value of going for a Tottenham player at this point in time. I think they are quite scary from defense, and their inability to keep clean sheets and really how easy it is for them to be run over in various instances of the game is really concerning. So that's why Pedro Porro falls. Mings and Axman, I've talked about it previously, where their fixtures just aren't perfect, where Liverpool, Tottenham, Brighton, these are all games where they could definitely lose a clean sheet. Wolves being a great fixture, but after that, just not really a serious option. 5.0 to 5.4, as I said, it's just Gabriel. No other movements there. I have replaced Akanji with Ake. The reason why, of course, is that I think Ake has always been more nailed than Akanji, but of course, we thought that Ake was actually more injured than I guess he was. He was able to come back into the game, played roughly 60-65 minutes versus West Ham, a team that completely sat back versus Man City, which I think is quite different. West Ham were clearly resting their players, arguably. A lot of people listed out for sickness, and I think the obvious call here is to suggest that they probably rolled over quietly versus City. But Ake coming back into the team is very interesting because I think he is more nailed. He is indispensable to the team, and we've seen actually Laporte just completely miss out on minutes anyways when Ake was out, and that's going to be much worse of a picture for Ake coming back in now that he's fit. As far as Chilwell, I talked about him as an option. He actually had fantastic opportunities to score versus Arsenal in the first half. And Arsenal are still a competent defense, but I think that they are now susceptible to making more mistakes and not having the same amount of control in games as previously. And you can see, of course, the underlying goals conceded for Arsenal, even just naturally the actual goals conceded has flown up as of late. That's one game sample size, of course, when we look at Chelsea, but they have been very, very lackluster, although I would say Chilwell is actually one of those nailed attackers where he could really be a great punt in Game Week 35 if you've actually kept him for this long, or you're actually even planning out a transfer this week, because this is a week where a lot of people were thinking of maybe benching Trippier because it doesn't seem super appetizing to play him versus Arsenal. And of course, if you're playing Shaw, then you're still looking for a third defender if you have Trent. So this could be a good week to actually go for a City defender or actually to go for someone like Chilwell. I think Chilwell is an interesting 2-week punt, and it covers you very well for these really, really bad Arsenal fixtures as well. So that's kind of why I like Chilwell back to back with these fixtures. But keep in mind, of course, that this Bournemouth team has improved as of late, so that is a point of concern. As far as Van Dijk and Robertson, these are two players that we really only considered for the double. Unfortunately, Robertson was actually benched for one of these fixtures, but that usually suggests that Robertson going forwards will come back into the team and start a few games. However, he did have a shocking performance, I would say, from a defensive point of view in the game versus West Ham, in the game versus Tottenham, and so maybe that's going to be sticking on Klopp's mind. Van Dijk, of course, made a huge mistake in that game too, but I think he's nailed in this team. The issue, of course, is that there's no real value to going for Van Dijk and Robertson when you have Trent existing as an asset, and you probably still don't want to double up on Liverpool at this point in time. So that's kind of why I feel like Trent is so clear of these other two options that you have to create a genuine point of separation between the two, now that it's no longer reasonable to actually double up or triple up on Liverpool, right? Because there's no more doubles in hand. And very, very similar logic for the goalkeepers this week. You can see with Kepa rising, similar to Chilwell, I think it's just the simple fact that Chelsea have two great back-to-back fixtures. You probably couldn't actually wish for anything better. Kepa has also shown to be very, very great as a keeper because he can make a lot of good saves. We no longer see a crazy amount of errors like he did it 2 years ago. He's been a great option this season and arguably a worse option under Lampard, but I still think these fixtures are perfect, and you've got to consider definitely playing Kepa in these fixtures. And particularly for those who actually went to Ederson, I mean, you might actually be considering playing Kepa in these 2 weeks as we head into Game Week 37, that double game week there. Ederson and Alisson both drop. Alisson for the reason where I explained that he no longer has doubles. You probably don't want to double up in Liverpool defense. As far as Ederson, that rest is actually a little bit scary to me. And of course, the Ederson lack of points, the lack of clean sheets has been a joke all season long. And it's of course even more hilarious that Ortega was actually able to bag a clean sheet on his first start. But that is a bit concerning, right? Because how often do you see a goalkeeper actually needing rest? Ederson got that rest and he missed out on a clean sheet. I don't really think that Pep will actually move away from Ederson. He's too quintessential to this team. But I mean, now that he's able to be rested, I guess he can't really be considered as a serious option going forwards, particularly if you're looking to transfer him in for Game Week 37. Now he's arguably as interesting as an option as some of the defenders who, even with less minutes, you'd probably say are more interesting than going for Ederson. So that's kind of my picture there. And one of the issues with City, of course, is that they don't really concede many shots. So Ederson's ability to actually rack up save points is very limited unless he gets to play versus Liverpool. And so that's kind of my opinion on the cheat sheet this week for Game Week 35. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead.